whatever.
So you're fundamentally a spiritual techno optimist?
I 1,000,000% am. I don't like to spend a lot of time on Facebook personally, right? I find it to be a terribly depressing place. There's a mission field there. There absolutely is. And our neighbor includes people that we're friends with on Facebook and Instagram or whatever else. I would say generally as a capital C church, we haven't really made that connection yet. It's a means to an end, right?
It's difficult to do because it seems like you're using a tool that's designed for something very not what you want to use it for. How do you do that in a way that doesn't kind of backfire on you? I don't really understand that. All ready for a nice conversation. I got my my Taste Nirvana coconut water.
Taste Nirvana. Sounds
I've definitely become
like
a little bit
sell.
Well, sounds a little bit dangerous for a Christian to be playing with, you know. Nirvana, that's
this universalist crap going on right now.
Ah, man, that's a little progressive, isn't it? Is that? I mean, what's kind of the vibe of the church you're at right now? Is there pretty, like, I notice, even just kind of pick up on the little subtle linguistic references. There's still the general sense of like Protestant evangelical, like, I don't know. There's a lot of the language that I grew up with, but
right.
It's, I don't know. I see a lot of the communities that were teaching and talking that way, and I don't exactly know what that way is, but sure. Like, I see a lot of those communities dissolving or getting like extremely, I don't know, extremely woke. It's like either they just fizzle out or they go, exactly. So I'm interested to, like, where are you guys at?
Yeah, we are Assemblies of God Church. We're very Pentecostal, evangelical, charismatic, all that, that kind of thing. But we also are in a very conservative area. Like we're super suburb. You can drive 10 miles into the city, but you can also drive 10 miles in any other direction and get farms. So we have this kind of bizarre mix. I'd say I'm very familiar with the trend you're talking about, and I'd say we're straight down the middle. Like
that's quite a feat actually at this point.
Yeah. We have quite, like, when everything masks. I feel like masks was this like perfect opportunity to just see kind of where people stood on that side of things. We had like literally
an icon of which group are you?
Exactly. Right. We had half of the people that would show up show up and take their mask off as soon as they had the opportunity to, right? So very much
as soon as they're allowed,
background. Right. And then the other half was either just not in the building at all, or being pretty careful with masks, watching online, all that kind of stuff. So I'd say we're pretty split down the middle, and our leadership is pretty, I'd say they're really good at making sure everybody feels comfortable and making sure that they all know that, all the stuff that we'd be arguing about, that kind of thing, is way less important than all the other reasons we're getting together right now. So
that's great. Is it a, like, I mean, you could do that. You could sort of brush away the arguments and say these just aren't important.
Sure.
Or you can, I mean, how do you sort of counter that? You guys kind of are focusing. Is it like the center is just Jesus? It's not even the full Bible. It's just Jesus, because that was even part of the strategy of a church I was attending for a little while. But that's kind of the Anabaptist strategy of, like, we unify in Jesus, which ends up being this sort of mystical centering figure where it's like, well, what do you mean by Jesus, and what are you talking about when you say just the word, at least.
Right. Yeah. I'm in the middle of this book right now. I think it's called Christ and Culture. I'm totally blanking on the guy who wrote it, but it deals with a lot of these questions of, like, the author talks about the biggest problem of the Christian faith since it has been born is how you deal with the paradox, the problem of living, by the standards of Christ, and also living in the culture that we're in right now. And like there have been widely different strategies taken by many different Christians with some good and some bad effects on how we actually make that connection, how we actually make that deal. And I mean, different denominations, different churches are going to decide on different points, like where you draw this compromise and everything. But I think for us, at least at our church, it's really been a case by case sort of thing. Because I think like I remember one of the proudest moments I had at being in my church. This is a horrible sentence now sounding, but immediately after the whole George Floyd thing, right? When all that was going down, and there were a bunch of protests that happened everywhere, but including Grand Rapids. And in Grand Rapids, they turned into riots. We got fires. People were breaking stuff, businesses, all that kind of stuff. You know, all the stuff you saw in the news that was here. And our pastor got up like the next day in front of everybody and was like, listen, the reason they are protesting, the reason that is absolutely justified. What happened is unconscionable, and it happens every day. And we need to address that and be clear about that. But also, we can't burn the city to the ground, right? like somehow, although it seems impossible in this country, my pastor was able to have a nuanced opinion about something, and where there's a little bit of good, a little bit of bad on both sides of the field. And people generally understood where he was.
People responded well to that.
People responded well. So I wouldn't say, I'd say I'm proud. For the most part, I'm proud to say that I've met a church that doesn't seem to be just taking sides. It seems to be, for the most part, thinking through those sorts of things. But also, there's something to be said for, we have people on both sides. So we need to make sure that those opinions are represented all throughout. Right.
Well, and it's
you
like,
can take the cynical
there's no way of, I mean, if you kind of throw all the pressure on your pastor as being, the central figure of like the mouthpiece of the entire community, I think that's
sure.
I don't know. And this is where you can kind of start to just dig into general church model, not necessarily problems, but just like things that happen when you try different church models. And I that's kind of even what the reason I thought, okay, I need to talk to Caleb about this, because you're in deeper in this conversation as far as what you're doing sort of professionally and just like personally than a lot of people I know. And it's like, it's a really strange and kind of interesting moment thinking about what's happening with church and where it's going. Because I mean, partially, I think, especially with it being sort of linked to media culture and like even the thing that keeps coming to my mind is that church is sort of following whatever is happening on Patreon or OnlyFans or whatever. Sure.
Wow. No, I hear you. Yeah, I do think, just generally speaking, that the next great, I think it's an overused word, but revival of the church, the church at large will come when we stop underestimating the tools that technology gives us in the form of internet, media, marketing, whatever. So
you're fundamentally a techno optimist, a spiritual techno optimist?
I 1,000,000% are. I am. I think that certainly there's issues with the system, but I think that there's like, the way I've said it before is that I don't like to spend a lot of time on Facebook personally. Right. I find it to be a terribly depressing place where all of my relatives argue with strangers about politics and where just news article after news article of just awful things and everybody yelling at each other, whatever. Right. I'd rather not spend time there. And at the same time, I'm really glad that that's not the perspective that missionaries have when they think about their countries, right? Like there's a mission field there. There absolutely is. And our neighbor includes people that we're friends with on Facebook and Instagram or whatever else. But we're not really, as I would say, generally as a capital C church, we haven't really made that connection yet, right?
Capital
in a large
C meaning,
degree.
So you're like meaning,
like
I guess other
global,
than some people say, okay, the church Catholic.
Sure. When I say Catholic, I'm thinking like the global. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of churches around the world in this past year, and the general perspective I get is that the internet is still something to be largely like you have to be on there, but it's like a compromise. It's like I'm there just so people know I'm here. Like I'm just putting enough out there so that when people Google, they'll find me after I scroll through a couple pages. But
and it's supposed to be like sort of a bouncing tool, like to like, okay, then go get to know me in real life.
It's a means to an end, right? It's not a.
It's difficult to do because it seems like the tool itself, like what Facebook is sort of set out to do, is fundamentally different than at least what these guys are talking about, that what they want to use it for. And I mean, my personal perspective on it is pretty similar. Like you're using a tool that's designed for something very not what you want to use it for. And I mean, how do you do that in a way that doesn't kind of backfire on you? I don't really understand that. I mean, like I think if I dig deep enough, I might be techno optimistic as well. But on the surface right now, I'm struggling with a lot of techno depressionism, where I'm like,
I hear
shit,
you.
I don't know what's going to happen. As far as seeing how it's affecting churches and communities in general, that's really scary. And as far as seeing how it's affecting people on a personal level is very...
Most definitely.
I don't want to just get stuck in this mindset of like fear about the future, but this is a problem that I'm really interested in trying to like tease out a little bit.
Right. So I have been, especially over the past year with everything in COVID, but even well before that, me and the other people that I've been doing ministry with as Blackbar, big old sign behind me, media ministry that we have, I've been talking about what could a digital church actually look like, right? And when we think digital church, the first thing you probably think about is like a live stream, like what everybody was doing last year. And I like, that's not a bad place to start necessarily, to be able to people see your service online and everything. But I think if the goal is actually to make an impact with an entirely digital audience, you have to speak an entirely digital language. And I think to a large extent, churches have been just kind of happy with taking what they were already doing and just slapping it online and expecting people to come flocking. But in reality, the online space, it's an entirely different culture. It's an entirely different language in a lot of ways. It's a whole different set of needs in some ways, and churches have not yet started to make that transition. So I think one of the ways that I think about it, like when we talk about a techno optimist when it comes from the church perspective, I love that phrase, the opportunities, right? So in addition to just being a media guy, I'm a marketing dude, right? Which means underneath the skin is lizard scales, right? I'm just a soulless marketing executive. So I have to know, I'm the guy paying Facebook for access to your social security number, all that kind of stuff, right? And I have dug deep into the kind of tools that Facebook gives me access to, right? And the targeting tools and marketing and everything like that.
Which I've tried to mess with that interface, and it is complicated.
It's not as easy as it should be. But so I think it's not a controversial statement to say that, like, we don't communicate the gospel to every person the same way, right? So if I was talking to like a 6-year-old about Jesus, I would use different words. I would use different analogies. I might tell different stories. I might highlight different parts of the gospel to make it stick and make it important to them than I would for like a 40-year-old dude that lives in a different part of the country or something like that. If I knew about it beforehand, I might dress differently. I might like prepare differently, but I think it's relatively uncontroversial to say that we use different techniques to communicate the truth to different people, right? And I think churches know that too, because I've yet to go to a church that doesn't have at least a kids ministry and youth ministry, maybe a men's ministry, women's ministry, anything like that. There's value in contextualizing the gospel to certain groups of people. I think what's really interesting when we get online is that I'm not a part of a Facebook group that's just men, right? That's not, I mean, maybe those exist where you just have a million people in a group that's only guys, right? But I'm in Facebook groups about church media marketing. I'm in Facebook groups about my World of Warcraft addiction or whatever else. It's like these very specific niches, right? Where it's these hyper contextualized conversations on little tiny things that we're into, right? Yeah. And what Facebook advertising allows us to do is talk to those really specific. And when I say Facebook and Instagram and all the other social media sites have very similar systems. Talk to these super hyper specific people with these hyper specific interests with a hyper contextualized version of the gospel and deliver it straight to them in a language that only they can understand. It doesn't matter if anybody else understands, right? If they can understand it, if they can get it, if I can get it across to that group of people, that, I mean, I feel like we could change the world.
So as soon as you start talking this way, this kind of like, I can see the romantic side of this idea.
Right.
But then I think about most of the targeted ads that I've seen have just like, especially the more uncanny it is about how it like meets exactly me and like my where I'm at, the more I'm like just creeped out and like, no, why do you know this much about me?
That's totally fair. There's actually, if you can look up, by the way, for anybody listening, if you do a little bit of Googling, you can find out exactly everything Facebook knows about you. There's a page in the about section. So like your name, your marital status, where you live, if you live away from your hometown, if your parents have an anniversary coming up, like it knows all of that stuff, and it's spooky what it has access to. But I think you're right. I think to a certain extent there's a privacy concern wave that's coming on. But I would also say, generally speaking, that most people are not as privacy concerned as you and I might be. Generally speaking, the more tech savvy you are, the more concerned you are about that sort of thing. And
I think
that doesn't seem to be a priority for, at least in my country.
I think you're right on that. And I think that you can probably try to walk the line in the uncanny valley and try to make sure you find that level of like what people are comfortable with. But I don't think that's I mean, that's just the kind of the surface level thing that jumps out at me right away. But
sure.
I think the other side of it is just that I think being advertised, I don't know. I mean, this just goes back into a really general philosophy of advertising. It's like right now, it's like most of our online business models revolve around ads, and the only other option is the Patreon model, basically, right? A subscription-based model. And that's basically, you see, there's a hard line between everybody's either doing one or the other, or they're kind of doing both. Like YouTube right now is really experimenting with just, okay, either you do the subscription and you get rid of all the ads because we know they're super annoying, or we double down and we're going to put 50 ads in each 2-minute video you watch.
Yes.
And that's been,
I've had YouTube Red so long, I just can't take it.
I know. I was like, I keep on feeling like, okay, they're pushing harder. They're going to get me to do this someday, but I'm not going to do it. Am I going to do it? I'm probably going to do it. I hate you, YouTube.
The amount of YouTube that I watch every month, however much I'm paying, I don't even remember. It's worth it. That amount of time is worth it to me, not to sit those stupid ads.
So I'm saying, so when you do, I don't know. I'm trying to think about ads, because I've had this conversation a couple times with different friends where like, so, okay, if people have more information about me, they can advertise more relevant things to me, or they can advertise things that maybe I don't want, but in a more relevant way, so they can manipulate me into thinking that I want them.
Let's talk about this idea maybe through a different vehicle, right? So like I think the general advertising perspective, that strategy is something that's very church focused, and that like a church could reasonably pull it off. I'm sorry if you see my husky.
No, you don't have to apologize for that. It's just like, it's just giving me like, I don't know, goosebumps of cuteness, I think.
Right. He is pretty awesome. But I think probably the highest chance of success with this sort of system is going to be a personalized one. And when I say personalized, I mean the person doing the ministry is a person, not an entity, not a corporation, right? Which is difficult because churches like something that they could do all together. So it's a little bit harder to sell. But I have this wonderful example that the ending isn't awesome, but the story up leading into that is pretty great. So last year, I got into a hobby, one of the probably dozen of hobbies that I got into every single year. But this one was really weird, and I apologize in advance for how weird it is. But I really got into Nerf guns. That was something I was like
That's
super
a good
into.
hobby. I'm into that.
I bought Nerf guns, and I would modify them to shoot like 3 times as hard and put holes in my driveway, right? Or I would 3D print them. And it was unhealthy. I probably spent way more money than I should have on children's toys over the course of a couple months, right?
That's great.
It turns out that if you buy all these guns, eventually you want to have basically airsoft games with people, and those things exist, like Nerf games, but paintball or whatever. And there's leagues all around the country of these people do this. So I found a group of people. It was this itty bitty little Discord in West Michigan of this Nerfers club that was trying to get started up, right? And they needed a couple things. I could tell right off first of all, they needed a location really badly. They didn't have anything to play. This was pre-pandemic, I should say, right? They didn't have anywhere to go. The second thing is someone designed their logo. I don't know who it was, but they could have maybe done a better job, right? And I happen to be a graphic designer by trade, right? So I got into this community of people of whom I shared a very common interest with, right? That happened to be Nerf guns, right? And what I wasn't aware at the time, but eventually put words to, was in a way that I identified an audience. It was a group of people. It's a weird subsect. There will never be a Nerf club ministry at a typical church, right? That we have men's ministry, women's ministry. Nerf ministry is not going to be a thing, right? But I am a Nerf guy, apparently now, so I can do Nerf ministry. So I identified a group of people of which I had something really interesting in common with that brought us together, right? And I spent the next couple weeks. So first I identified the audience. The second thing is identify with your audience. I spent a couple weeks just talking shop, just talking about the kind of springs that I put in my Caliburn, talking about like, how do you keep the grease from messing up your air seal, right? And all this, just the conversations of just becoming a part of that community, right? A trusted member, right? All that kind of thing. So I identified my audience, identify with my audience. And the third step, I identified what my audience needed. And in this case, it happened to be a location to shoot each other in and a new logo. Well, I'm a graphic designer. I made them a new logo. It probably took half an hour. And I also happen to work at a church with a massive recreational facility that isn't used several days of the week. And I talked to my leadership team, and they were cool with us using it. And all of a sudden, I solved problems. They weren't spiritual problems, right? They were just practical problems that this group that I was in needed to solve, right? And then all of a sudden, I'm like, okay, I solved these problems. They put me as a chairman on their Nerf club, whatever the heck that's supposed to mean, right? I'm a chairman on this Nerf league that doesn't actually exist yet because we haven't played any games. And I say, yeah, I've got this location. And all of a sudden, people start to realize, oh, it's a church. And now there's these interesting conversations happening right next to what spring I'm putting in my Caliburn is it okay if I wear ripped jeans at church? It's all I have, right?
Wow,
it's
jeans.
Like, right. It's the like, is there going to be,
is Minnesota?
Is there going to be language restrictions? Like, is it okay to swear? Like, and all of a sudden we're having these micro conversations about church and people's last time they were in a church, and all this door has been opened because I was just one of those people, and I happened to be a Christian. I happened to be at a church or whatever, right? And it's just all this isn't a new concept. I'm just caring for my neighbor. We've just expanded what the definition of being a neighbor is. And I think really the problem of why the church hasn't begun to push out into digital spaces the way that I think that it really needs to be is because Christians individually haven't seen other individuals online as someone that they should be reaching out to, the people that they have connections with.
Are you wondering, I mean, and obviously I'm not trying to get you to just sit there and just defend this new church model, and I'm going to sit there and push back. I hope this could be just kind of a shop brainstorming session, and we can just talk about what's happening. But so, I mean, you're optimistic that, are you kind of see the church as an institution moving in that direction, and you think that's going to be sort of the most useful way to sort of engage culture with this, this story, this tradition?
I would love to say that is what I think is going to happen. I think honestly what's going to happen is individuals are going to realize what kind of power they have sitting in their pocket, and they're going to make it happen. And about 10 years later, the church will recognize that was a really good idea and then start figuring it out. But I think really, I hate the definition of like a Christian influencer. I think it's a really shallow way to look at it. The definition that we've been using on our team is a digital missionary. It is like your ultimate goal is not just to influence people, it's to be a missionary for Christ. And it just happens that your mission field is some weird Nerf Discord group, right? But right. Training people to think that way and look for opportunities online. I think once we get people moving that direction is where the floodgates open.
So I'm just trying to think about, so in order for me to start to process whether or not I'm kind of on the same page about whether or not I think this can even work, I need to know more, or even just kind of clear up the idea of what a missionary is or what they're supposed to do. Because I mean, a lot of this stuff is just like, I'm kind of at a place where I'm in between, I don't know, congregations. I'm not plugged into a church community right now, and it's and I'm really hoping to figure out how to do that again. It was kind of like my wife and I, we got married and we were like just kind of shopping around trying to get connected to a different community, and then COVID happened, and it was like, okay, well, I don't know what's happening now. And so now we've just had this year to just kind of rethink, where are we at, and how do we want to engage with this faith of ours?
Right.
And so, I mean, a lot of these definitions about like missionaries and stuff, like, I mean, now I'm kind of stepping back a little bit and looking at different communities' models for how that's supposed to work. Like, and so I'm not exactly sure, like, is a missionary somebody who goes, I mean, I have friends, I have family members who've done the sort of traditional evangelical, like, I'm going to go out into the world. I'm going to go into, it's got to be a country that is not this one. Right. And I'm going to go and be a missionary there because, the Bible says go out into all the world. And that means not this country. And so I'm going to go do some traveling
right.
for some reason. That's part of it. And I'm sounding kind of cynical, and you're just going to have to forgive me for some of my cynicism. It's probably just part of the process of working through where I'm at. But
I 1,000,000% understand and share your cynicism with them.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe we both need help here, or maybe it's just a crappy model. But I mean, so I've seen a lot of people kind of acting out this really simplistic version of what it means to be a missionary, where you just sort of go out and then, well, what do? You like do street ministry where you like you do music, and then you do an altar call, and then people get saved, and then now their lives are changed because they got saved, or you, I don't know, it's very event focused and stuff like that. And one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about is I think there might be a place. I think there probably is a place for that. I don't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater there. I think that there is a place for doing sort of spiritual events where you get people sort of you do your best to try to create a sort of mountaintop moment where people have this sense of seeing a little bit of the big picture and being like, oh, okay, there is something bigger that I could strive for. But that's like, I think that needs to be a bit more marginal than what we've kind of been doing especially in the Protestant tradition. It's like that seems to be at the very center, is like the conversion moment and like going and getting people. But like, as far as actually, like, to me, Christianity is mostly, and I mean, it's a philosophy, it's a theology, and like I said, it's a philosophy. So it's really just a pattern of life. It's a way of living, I think. Right. And how do you engage Christianity? How do you sort of spread the good news in a way that is not just like, get people saved and right. Like you can have those moments where you build up to a conversation and you can invite people to an event. But I think, I don't know, I'm just trying to think about what it is that a missionary does. Is a missionary somebody who does the event thing, or is that somebody who just builds connections with people, and then in that case, maybe every Christian is a missionary, or I don't know. Right. Where do you land on that?
I personally, I think that we might have done ourselves a disservice by, intentionally or not, turning missionary into a profession. right? Like, I am a missionary. That is what I do. That is what I'm going to do when I, go to Nepal or whatever and climb mountains for the next year and talk to people. I think it's like, their job, those peoples that are going, their job is to reach people with the gospel, right? So I'm going to happily donate to my church's missions fund so I can make sure that they can continue to reach people. And yeah, I'm sure to a large extent that it is going to be the so I know at least, how do I put this? I know at least I spent pretty much my entire life in the Assemblies of God. It's a right. Specific Pentecostal denomination. I owe most of my career to the assemblies in a lot of different ways. But I think I know a lot of missionaries that went through their system, and they have a very strict system. Like if you're going to be Assemblies of God missionary, you can't have a certain amount of student loans. You have to have wow, okay. a certain amount of education and this sort of thing. There's classes you have to go through. You have to get approved by boards. You have to itinerate at Assemblies of God churches. Like there's a huge system. And then you get over there, and what they're looking for, what they want to hear back from you, these churches that are supporting you, are conversion stories, right? That's what they want. And that's how, like slimy marketing brain, right? That's how you retain funding is by getting the conversion stories, right? That's what people want to hear. But I think in actuality, from the friends I know that are missionaries, 90% of their job over there or wherever they are is not like directly talking about Jesus with people. It's being a teacher and developing relationships and being a good friend and and maybe a quiet Christian influence in a place where that might not be as common as it should be, right? And those are all things that I think all of us, generally speaking, under the Great Commission should be doing, right? Like, we don't have to go through all these classes and like, Lord, I hope that there's no student loan requirement. So
then what should differentiate people sort of doing it? I mean, so you're questioning whether or not it should even be a profession?
Yeah, I think by the fact that we've called it like, oh, I am a missionary, and that is something I do,
Christian,
that we've drawn this line of there's people that evangelize for a living, and then there's everybody else. And our job is to just support the people who are evangelizing for a living. And that's my
so that way they can go and make converts
to the Great Commission. Exactly. Right. Like, as if that now Great Commission, check, I'm set to go. I can go back to doing the rest of my life. Right. Say, I don't know. I don't think it's unfair to say that that's maybe not the best model and maybe not the best use of our time and resources. And I don't know. I feel like we could be doing more. And I think personally, this,
just throw out ideas, man.
The electronic positive person that I am, or whatever the heck phrase you use.
Techno optimism.
I think that the easiest door for us to do that in is the one that we can.
Are you techno positive?
Get tested. Is the one that I can do without wearing pants in my basement, right? I've never met any of those Nerfers before.
Right.
Nerfers is a title. I've never met any of them. I still don't know what any of them look like, but we were able to have some interesting conversation about Jesus as a result. And I didn't have to go stand on a box at a street corner and scream at strangers. Right. I don't know. It seems like an easy option to me.
Okay. I think that actually unlocks a little bit of optimism for me about sort of Christianity in the techno environment, or technological environment, techno environment. Dude, the problem is like that is a used prefix. Yeah, but I always just think about techno music, or at least I think about whenever, obviously growing up in the circles that we grew up, if you are into any sort of electronic music, all of the old people just thought, oh, that's techno, right? Techno.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Hip-hop,
like listening to
techno,
Skrillex
whatever.
and say, oh,
it's
that's
not real
techno,
drums.
right?
It's techno.
Okay, sorry. I was trying to say that does actually help me to think a little bit, okay, maybe it is possible to the extent that it's possible to build meaningful relationships online. And I think that online relationships can be a meaningful thing. I don't think it's not comparable to what we have in person. Like there's not the same amount of information, it's not the same amount of connection. And I think that, yes.
I would agree that it's different. I would definitely agree that it's different.
So you would push back on that? You don't think that it is inferior?
I think it's currently inferior. I think that is a temporary problem.
Okay.
Personally, I think that that is temporary. I think at the rate that technology is moving, it's a temporary problem.
So this is I'm not. This is the thing. I'm totally unsure about this. I can't say that I disagree with you. There's a part of me that sort of intuitively thinks. Yeah, my intuition is that I don't think we're going to get there. I don't know if that's wrong though, because part of the things I'm thinking about. Like, so what's the difference between engaging with somebody in person versus, on the internet? And I've been challenging myself on this a lot too, just thinking about, okay, so what's the difference between? Why do I have this sort of slimy feeling when I spend too much time playing video games?
Sure.
Like what's the difference between, I don't know, whatever's happening here and doing this in real life? And I think part of it is that there's sort of a branching structure of engagement that happens when you're in person, and I think that happens online too. But let me kind of explain what I mean by that, because I know that's just kind of a weird, just vague term that's not saying anything specific. But like if I'm let's say I'm playing a team sport in real life, right? That's a game, right? I mean, that's just the same thing as a video game, right?
Right.
Not exactly. There's a different level of engagement for one thing.
Involved.
Right. There's sweat involved. So obviously there's an engagement of just moving your body and movement and that's I think it's so that's just engaging more of your senses. And so it's an art that's not just hand-eye coordination. It's listening, it's speaking. Well, I mean, I guess that's online too, but it's paying attention to I mean, body language is one of the biggest things that's kind of identifiable, because I think I forget psychologists. I don't know who's doing these studies. I read recently in a smart book by a smart guy that that more than 90% of communication in a conversation is nonverbal.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So a lot of what we're doing when we're interacting with each other is not just text or even sound. It's intonation, which we lose a bit of with the granularity. I mean, we could just up the sound quality. Maybe we'll have more intonation.
Sure.
But there's also I don't know. I think the attempt to say that we can actually replicate everything that's going on in a human interaction in person via our technology, that is kind of the scary mistake to me.
Do
you think that it's possible?
I would bet it. I'd bet in probably the next 15-20 that it'll be indecipherable.
That's what actually scares me, though, is because the more indecipherable it is, the more your argument makes sense. But I have this sort of romantic, this romantic sense of that
I hear you.
That there's this sort of mystery. Like, I don't actually know all of the features that are of engagement that are happening when I'm talking to you in person. And so the better we get at sort of modeling that, the more we think the model is the real thing, rather than continuing to study the real thing to see what else is there that we don't know is happening.
I hear you. And I think it's fair to say that I don't want, nor do I think will, I don't think that the digital space and digital connection will entirely replace physical. I think that to a certain extent, we will always need some sort of physical, like real IRL, interaction with people. But so one story that I love to tell, and this is certainly like on the upfront, the fringe of technology, right? But I bought into virtual reality a couple of years ago, right? I bought a headset, right? And I bought the headset, and it was amazing. I don't know if you've ever tried it before, but it is incredible.
It's pretty cool.
I got it. I have a very good friend of mine, Nick, also on the Blackbar team. He came over and tried it. He put on the headset. He had it on for like half an hour, and then it was my turn. And while I was in the headset, he had bought his own headset on his phone.
That quick.
Right? Exactly. It was that quick. So he goes home and he sets up his headset, whatever, and I've got mine set up, and we fire up an app called Virtual Desktop, which, whatever, it does some things, but it allows that he can sit on a couch and I can sit on the same couch, and we can like watch movies and stuff in the same room, and I can see his head move, I can see his hand moves or whatever. And so we pop into this room, and I look over to my left, and he's sitting next to me, and his mic isn't working for whatever reason. He hadn't set it up right. But even, the face wasn't him. It was just a default avatar
Right.
But with the movement of his head and the movement of his hands, I recognized that was Nick Mayo. I could tell just from the nonverbal, that's the way Nick moves his head. That's the way Nick moves his hands. That's Nick Mayo, right? And it's a tiny thing. It's a small thing. It's probably in 10 years, people are going to be laughing about, like, you know, in the same way that we're laughing at people 10 years ago talking about graphics can never get better than the Ocarina of Time, right? Like, it's definitely going to improve further and further. But like the nonverbal communication stuff, to be able to talk to people, to be able to see their face, their emotions, and all that kind of stuff. Some of the closest relationships I have are people who live in hundreds of miles away from me that I only can interact with online in video calls, stuff like this. So I do think that there's a barrier right now. We're not there yet, but I also think of like there's a church. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a virtual reality church. They do water baptisms, where the pastor will, like, there's a virtual reality stage on VR chat or whatever, and people will come up and, like, there's like digital water or whatever. Now, is it the same? No,
I don't know.
Really. Would I count
so
that person
strange.
as baptized? That's probably for God to decide.
That's so strange.
You know, if the main goal is, you know, for baptism, it's a symbolic effort, right?
Okay. And how much symbolism can be accomplished within a?
And it's also built as a tool to communicate to the people around me, my close friends or whatever, that this is a stance I'm making. This is the team I'm on. I'm willing to do this, right?
Yeah. So
all
you're still
of
having that
stands.
sort of social symbol. The thing is just so every time you're. A fundamental feature of the way things are marketed and presented online, and just technology in general, is that we tend to chop off the least useful 80% so we can focus on whatever we think is the distilled, most important features of whatever the activity or the media or the practice or whatever it is that we're trying to engage with is.
Right.
And that's what I'm afraid of. It's just every time that we sort of try to zero in sort of permanently and sort of deeply buy into a model of a particular 20% of an idea or of a, I mean, this is why I wanted to talk about technology and church, because I think to the extent that we think we understand church and then we can sort of model it on with the internet, with virtual reality, that's what's so scary to me, is because I don't think we know exactly what church is.
What do you think we'll lose?
Part of it is that I don't want to have to answer that question totally. I know that I need to actually point to some things in order for there to have some weight to my concern here, but I want to fundamentally, I mean, this is where I want to use language like the spirit of things, because that's part of the way I would philosophically use the word spirit, is to talk about the features and the aspects of the structural, functional organization of a thing that is beyond what you can sort of consciously perceive about the thing.
Sure.
So it's like, what's the spirit of me? Well, it's like, it's not just, that I have hands and they look like this and I have a face that looks like this and my general speech patterns sound like this. We can sort of emulate all of that. And if we emulated it really good, does it approach being me and eventually it is me? Or is that emulation never actually me? I mean, this is the kind of sci-fi stories that we're telling right now, because we're struggling with this sort of question as a culture.
But I think, so maybe this isn't a perfect example, but I don't think anybody would argue that me listening to an MP3 of a worship song and feeling the spirit in my car is not valid, because that my interaction with it came as a result.
I think you would probably get Orthodox or Catholics arguing with you about that, because they would be well, but that's one of the interesting things, though, that I'm beginning to, because at this point I've kind of branched out and have so many of these, like, this strange encounter with Christian faith, where, like, most of my conversations about faith aren't within the walls of my church, because I don't have a church right now. This past year has just been like, okay, well, I'm continuing to try to engage and think about my faith, and I'm going to do that online. And when you go on the internet, you just sprawl out, and you have this, also the feature of sort of just being an autodidact. You don't have anybody sort of leading you in your learning. You just follow whatever's interesting. You follow the muse, right? And so I've just been, following whatever theological rabbit trail I want to go down, And part of that scares me thinking about church in that context, because I don't know how much of an idiot I am. I might.
Well, I 100% agree with that. I hear you there.
And so, but I mean, so as I've been talking, all that to say, I've been talking to some different Catholic and Orthodox friends about other ways of engaging with faith and maybe more ancient ways, and they have a very deep place in their hearts. I mean, for the Catholic and for the Orthodox, this is like, it's really important that you do it in person. If it's not in person, it's not even church.
Absolutely.
And it's really important that you do it with this ordained priest, because, I mean, especially with the Orthodox, it's like they have this sense of, I'm not sure if it even matters, but to them, they talk about it as if like, literally, St. Peter ordained these guys who ordained these guys, and there's a direct path all the way from Christ Jesus himself all the way to these current people sort of in institutional power, and that's like really important to them. And it's like,
absolutely.
I've been able to push back a little bit and say, okay, but I mean, so you're saying that anything less than drinking wine and eating bread in this sort of a building with these sort of symbols on the walls, that's not really communion, or that's not really the Eucharist. And he's like, well, it's Eucharistic, it's just not the height of what you're capable of. And that was a good place to sort of land. And I'm hoping to talk with that friend again soon. So I'm appreciating that there's various levels, but I think that I think there's something to that, though, that like, okay, when we distill down to the most useful 20% of what we think communion or worship is, we get somewhat of what we're sort of experimenting with in the Protestant realm of like, okay, well, worship is like music, and okay, we're going to do a really good musical performance. And like with Hillsong and Bethel, we've been sort of experimenting with that and seeing, okay, so what is it? Is it a really, I don't know, is it a really explosive emotional musical moment where you like emotionally lead people into this place? I mean, perhaps that's
apparently it's making really mediocre, uninteresting music.
Which is that, which kind of, I mean, it's easy to be cynical about this stuff, and I think I think it's good that it's becoming easier to be cynical about it, but it's also scary because then it's like, okay, so you just throw it out and then you're like done with faith. So I don't want to just do that. I think that even to the extent that we're sort of experimenting with these kind of new, fresh models, I think that's really interesting and important. I don't know what we're missing when we make when we make church liturgy the same thing as what we're doing, when we put on a concert like with any other kind of pop band. Right.
Is it just another step away from that? And I hear what you're saying, because I've read some reports about, especially among our generation, this big move back towards more liturgical style churches, Catholic churches, or anything like that. And I have heard about the problem. Like, I had a good friend of mine that I met through Blackbar, one of the people that found us. He's a media guy at a Anglican church, and they shut down everything. He was in Australia, there was like mandatory shutdown. Can't go outside of your house unless you're getting groceries, shut down. But in the Anglican church, in order for communion, which I believe they take every week, to be really communion, it must be blessed by a priest that day, right? So like, how do you do that online? That doesn't
translate.
I don't have a good
Amazon 24-hour delivery. I'm thinking back to Julian Smith's pre-blessed food video. Remember that?
Yes,
you don't want your food blessed by a white guy. We got food for you too. Right. We can get it blessed by a black man if you want.
Yeah, I think, and maybe there's some church techno positive activists that might disagree with me, if there's such thing as church techno positive activists. But I think this sort of thing is, and this might be a cop-out, but it's an example of the importance of diversity in the church, capital C church. I don't think that there's anybody who would say that, I hope, that I want all of the church to move to digital. And like, I think that's the best way to do it. I don't think that's the best way to do it. I think it's a way to do it. That's what I'm fighting for. I think that this is a perfectly acceptable way to do church, that maybe there's a way to do, we've been doing communion online for the past year. We just tell people to go get crackers and juice from their fridge, right? We're AG, so no alcohol. So it's always crackers and juice, right? But,
depending on how long it's been in the fridge, though.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Water baptism is a little bit trickier, but I think that there's, and we're talking about the ordinances and all that kind of stuff. But I think there's a lot of other parts to church outside of the ordinances when it comes to fellowship, when it comes to discipleship, when it comes to evangelizing. I think all those can be done in a digital context. I don't think they should only be done there. I don't think that everybody needs to make that move. My grandma does not need to start a digital, ministry or something like that. But the fact that that's not a normal thing, that people are doing that yet, that's concerning me. Since so much of our culture, whether we like it or not, is moving increasingly digital. Apparently, I read this stat not that long ago, something like the average American spends 6 hours a day online.
That's probably low.
Yeah, I spend more than 6 hours a day online. My entire work is online. Then I come home and play Destiny for another 4 hours. Right. Yeah. So it's my life is majority online. And if we're not there and making an impact there, I think we're missing a huge opportunity. It's not the only opportunity, but it is an opportunity.
That quells a lot of my concerns, actually, man. I think the fundamental difference is just whether or not we are hoping or planning to replace the classical model or to sort of expand and say both and we want to sort of, because I've been thinking, I don't know if this is too deep of a weird internet cut. This is the problem with the internet, again, is that you just you never know if your algorithm is anywhere near the same as anybody else's. So you have no idea if the content you're about to talk about has any relation to the other person. But I've been paying attention to this guy, Jonathan Peugeot, and he is an Orthodox
we're
icon.
On different algorithms, apparently.
Yeah.
So I have no idea what that
he uses this image of to talk about the church and to talk about things in general. But specifically, he originally talks about it in terms of the church, where it's like he kind of relates it to like a city, where there's a city center and it's like a mountain. So there's a center, and then as you sprawl out, you get further and further out to the margins of the city, and at the margin, that's where sort of the monsters are at. And this whole picture is sort of an important picture of like a full, complete city. If you remove any bit of that structure, the city becomes dysfunctional. Even if you remove the monsters, because he argues that the monsters sort of protect you from the scarier monsters beyond.
Sure.
Right? And so it's like within those terms, it's like that's actually helped me to kind of have an image to relate this whole relationship of thinking about the church, capital C, to use your word.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so we have a central way in which this sort of Christian tradition is practiced in, I don't know where you want to point to that, but, and then as you get further out, you have more and more sort of experimental types of Christianity. And if you were to just say, no, we don't want to experiment at all, you've removed, and I'm not trying to be derogatory here, but you've removed the monsters that are protecting you from the horrible great beyond, right?
Right.
You actually need to incorporate these experimental models and say, okay, we need to continue to make space for that and continue to engage. Anytime there's sort of a blank spot in our sort of defense system, or like the outer margins of who we are, we need to fill that in and say, okay, how can we engage that place?
Right.
So I think, I don't know, does that more or less feel like what you're saying?
Yeah, I hear you. I think I also, I'm probably one of the monsters by your definition.
Hey, if you go on Netflix, monsters are totally in right now. Everything's monsters. Sexy definitely. Beasts, dude.
I live. Oh, my dog's just hanging out. Whatever. I love experimenting. I probably said it in a handful of Blackbar videos. Like the only thing that I hold sacred is scripture, and there's nothing that tells me that we need to start our services with announcements and do 4 songs and then do a communion, and like that whole system is it's a system that's worked for a long while. That doesn't mean it's the only system that will work, and I'm ready to chuck out everything if that means reaching somebody. So maybe I'm a bigger monster than other people by your definition,
you're protecting them though.
Definitely right, but I think there's certainly value in and it may not be where I lean towards, but holding on to the more tradition, holding on to because if we just go entirely my direction, who knows what's left of what was originally Christianity to begin with, right? Like we need somebody to be able to hold. It's like
who knows what we were missing about one-on-one engagement if we just made it totally video chats from now on.
But I think, as much as denominations in general have caused me extreme grief in my own like personal spiritual walk and just understanding how God interacts with people, I think they're like vitally important to reaching different kinds of people.
Yeah.
I think that's really, if I had to look at from it like the least cynical way that I possibly could,
right,
seems to be like the function of denominations in a way, and the function of different sort of churches.
Right.
They're just 4 different kinds of people to interact with the same Jesus.
It feels like this would be a great place to wrap it up, but there's actually
Sure.
2 or 3 other things that like are going to take a long time to discuss that I think I want to keep going.
I got all day.
If we got all day, then let's keep going, because one of the problems with, you talk about, you want to sort of brand Christianity. Okay, I'm already running into scary terms here, branding. But you want to engage different kinds of people, and so that's and I think I agree that that's more or less the functionality of different communities. But I think the key thing where I think it gets to be dangerous is, well, I think I'm just noticing this progression towards online church becoming even to the extent that it can be compared to the Patreon model, it's sort of selling content. And that's, I don't know what to do with that. Like, because Christianity is not about, to me at least, it's not about giving somebody a thing. It's not transactional. It's fundamentally relational.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So, but this is a problem that extends beyond church. I mean, this is just in general what we're doing with community right now, right?
But, I think that the trick is that, and it's kind of a give and take, but content is the price of attention online, right? If you want people to listen to, you have to be saying something. You have to be doing something. So in the same way that the church is not necessarily about cleaning toilets, a church also has to clean toilets, right? It has to take care of its own bathroom. That might not be the primary function. That might not be like the sole purpose of the church is to create content. But if creating content means getting people in the door, means opportunities for relationship, then sign me up. I'll create content all day long. What I don't think we need is people who really take a very shallow perspective at it and just become Christian content creators, where they do Nerf, but then they
Christianity is just a target audience that you could be making money off of.
Exactly. We're not going to do, dirty, scary, hard rock. We're going to be like dirty, scary, hard rock, but with a Christian edge. And then we're only going to play Christian festivals, right? It's like, that's not what we want. We don't want just Christian alternatives to everything, right?
Which we definitely experimented with in the 90s to 2000s. That was
the
pretty much
skillet
a disaster.
Model is not what we're looking for here.
Which
right?
Surprisingly, I still like John Cooper. That's the main guy from Skillet, right?
Yeah.
He seems like still a surprisingly solid dude. And Skillet has lasted for a lot longer than I would have expected them to as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's some weird success stories in that experiment.
Yeah, most definitely. And with everything, it's a lesson. We learn good things, we learn bad things, everything, right? But I think content creation it's a part of what we just got to be able to do. In the same way that I think, like, maybe this is a weird analogy, but my church, it does really good worship. Like the actual music, the production and everything like that, we spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money making sure that our music is really good. And I think I can honestly say we're probably the best in our area for that sort of thing. Is that the point? No, but it's a part of it, and it's one of the things that draws people in.
How do you push back against because I think that's a really great philosophy to keep in mind of every feature of the church. Is that the point?
Sure.
No. How do you stay centered and like not let that become the point? Have you guys? I don't know. How are you guys trying to do it?
I think honestly the way that you do that is, and maybe this is tying back a little bit, is that you don't make the point only certain people's job, right? Is like the point is, yeah, missionaries are super good, right? We should have missionaries. We should be sending people over. But the point of the Great Commission and everything like that is something that we all should be doing individually, right? So, we can give to the church, at my church or whatever, we can give, we can support the worship team or whatever, all that kind of stuff. But the point, the aim of the church, the goal of church is not something that only our worship pastor is doing. It's not something that only our senior pastor is doing. That's something that we're hopefully encouraging the body to do. It's easier to send out 2,000 bodies to 2,000 places than have those people bring people to our church. So, yeah, I think it's equipping and empowering the individual to make a difference in their circle, whether that be digital or physical.
Right. Well, and so this is part of the thing that I think we might, as far as pointing out some specific things we might miss about,
sure,
like when we are, with the current experiment we're doing in the Protestant realm, where church is becoming, and we're trying to push back against this, but it's becoming somewhat an event that you attend, right?
Yes,
and
definitely.
To the extent that it becomes that, the whole analogy of being the body, and depending on what perspective theologically you're looking at it, it's not an analogy, but the idea of Christians, people who are Christians, being the body of Christ totally falls apart, because the body isn't something that just shows up and observes itself once a week, right?
Right.
Fundamentally, what a body even is the potential to do things, like, right, especially from a more ancient, like I think this is. Again, this is the kind of talking to my Orthodox friends about this stuff from their perspective. Sure. Like, there's a lot of philosophical engagement with that perspective, where like a body, and this is something that I've learned recently. So, sorry, I'm saying the same thing a couple of times here.
You're good.
A body is, I think, even from the perspective of the authors of most of the Bible, a body is the potentiality to do something. It's not the sure, cells that make up your hand or your arms or things like that. That's why you could say that, people, Christians being the body of Christ, that's not an analogy. It's sure, literally the way in which God acts on earth is through people engaging with his message and with his way.
Sure. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. And I think it's, in a way, that is how you do it. That's how you keep the point, right? As we were talking about, that's how you keep it at the front. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff we have to do, but the individuals, the people, and all that kind of stuff are playing their part and having their piece in whatever the point is for their circle.
But the larger... So this is just related to the numbers thing. This isn't specifically to do with the internet, but the
sure, internet
feeds into this, because the larger the community that is sort of showing up for the event, and we can try to push back from it being the event, the larger the group, though, of people that is being somewhere and doing the thing, the less personally engaged each person is.
Sure. That's why small groups became a thing,
right,
15 years ago, and every church all of a sudden had small groups.
Let's do this. Yeah.
That we were doing. Right. Yeah. It's working for them,
right,
which it's not a bad idea. I think it's understandably, it's obviously worked for a lot of people. I've never been to a small group that wasn't terribly cringe personally.
So why is it that they, because, okay, so obviously we're agreeing here that small groups are fundamentally important for the church to actually function as a church.
Sure.
Right? But why are they so freaking cringe?
Okay, so I have not been to anything that I would call a small group that like the church would call a small group that I think is not frickin' cringe, as we say. So when we started Blackbar, which is for anybody listening who's not familiar, it's a ministry devoted to helping churches understand how to use media marketing tech to spread the gospel. Obviously related to what we're talking about today. But the when we started it, it was supposed to be that, and all of a sudden using media to reach the world became vitally important around March of 2020. And when we started making videos on starting up live streams, all that kind of stuff, and we had a community. For us, it's we use Discord, social media platform. We started getting questions, and that was the point of the Discord, to be able to answer questions, to go deeper into stuff. But it became overwhelming very quickly. There were it started off with dozens, then it turned into hundreds of questions every single day of people. They needed desperate help and they needed it right now, and they had no idea what was going on. And the problem was, I've never live streamed a church service in my entire life. That is not my gig. I draw pictures for a living. I do video, but not that kind of video. So I was way out of my league. But what we started to observe, which was really fascinating, is that there was two types of people that were coming to our Discord. There were people that were desperately looking for help, and there were people that just liked church media marketing stuff. They had a background in that, and they were offering help. Right. So they just started answering questions. Some people more accurately than others, but it turned into basically a forum where people were helping each other, generally answering questions, all that kind of stuff. And we found that what was supposed to be just a general, like an innocent idea, is like, okay, there are certain people that are giving really good advice. Let's find a way to designate those as like a trusted source of information. Right. So we came up with a role called Certified Pro Role, and we picked people that were doing a really awesome job helping people. You're a certified pro now, so your name is yellow. So people, when they see you respond to them, they know that it's accurate information, whatever. And then we made a little private chat for the certified pros to talk to each other. I would say out of everything that happened of Blackbar, that I can point to as that was success, that was an amazing idea, was the private group channel for the certified pros, which became accidentally a small group in a way. It was a bunch of nerds. It was church nerds, really, that all this similar interest, somewhat similar background, somewhat similar profession. And we were there for a common purpose, which was to help churches figure out how to do media, but also to pray with each other when something horrible happens in their life, right? And to talk about theological concepts that are tripping us up, right? And it's like it served as this huge function of a small group where we're just a bunch of guys that happen to have the similar interest, and we're talking to each other, we're praying with each other, we're sharing wins and losses, and in ways that only church media people would understand when the wrong verse goes up on the screen or something like that. But I think the thing that made it not freaking cringe was the common objective. It was something that we were all good at, something that we're all focused at, and it was our small group's point, right? It was our goal. That was our goal that we could achieve, that we could drive the kingdom forward. It was something that brought us back every single time. It wasn't just for the like, oh, what am I going to get from this every time? You know, which is a very pastor thing to, it's like, no, you shouldn't be talking about but what can you give? But it was us giving to a certain group of people. Right.
Well, even beyond give, I think engage is a better word too, because
definitely getting
and giving is still linking into this transactional language where it's like, okay, it's about, I don't get something, give something. It's like, well, it's not that. It's a relationship with people, and that's so much more real than just exchange of capital.
Absolutely. And we could talk about, like, when someone new joins the Discord and they have a certain kind of questions, or the questions that they ask veer off of media into more church relationship stuff or burnout that they're suffering or something like that. We can strategize, and we can talk about the best way to minister to that person. We've had some very serious conversations where we've had to contact people in, like, the Discord community's family or their churches and stuff like that, based on stuff that they talk about to us. And we're able to do that because that's what we love doing. We love helping, because this is a community that we belong in, right? So
this is something that manifested and fleshed itself out very organically, very naturally.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a goal, right?
Is it something that you think you can sort of force and just say, okay, we're going to go start one of these, or does it just happen sometimes?
I think, I don't know, because I've only done it once and it was accidental. But I think if I were to try to do it again, I think the way that you find people like that are of like-minded, whatever, is to just start doing the job, right? So I just, like, it wasn't my goal to set out to find a group of people like that, but it was my goal to help other churches figure out church media stuff, and other people that had similar interests were attracted to that, got sucked in, put through the system. And now all of a sudden we've got this awesome team of the world's best volunteers that just happens to be a small group at the same time. So I don't know if it's something that you can force, but I think that if you start doing, Like if I started actively, it ended up being only the one time, and then COVID happened when it comes to that Nerf ministry. So nothing actually ended up going on because everything got shut down. But if that was something that I was actively doing and communicating, and it was clear that I was a Christian and going into Nerf groups and having these sorts of conversations, I imagine other people would start put like, hey, this is also a background I have. Maybe we could work together. It'd probably be passive, right? I don't think you could just like there's a 10-step program to make it happen or anything like that. I think you just got to start working, just start doing the job that God's called you to do. And the other people will show up if they're necessary. Maybe that's idealistic, but it worked for me.
I think that's a good idealism to have. I think it's, I don't know. I'm noticing, like, I'm thinking about, like, I don't know how I could just go about starting this or just making it happen. But I mean, in my own life, I've had that sort of thing happen to some extent, and it just usually ends up happening, due to just common interests. You end up connecting with people,
right?
And that's been great. And especially, I don't know. I'm stuck in between, wondering whether or not, especially an institution is best to be responsible for that, because again, there's this sort of just disconnection of, like, the further away the people running the thing is from the actual people, the less sort of ability you have to sort of to engage what's actually happening in the group.
It's kind of this give and take system, because if you're really successful in the ministry, eventually it does get bigger and it becomes an institution,
right?
Whether you want it to.
So what do you do then? Do you just intentionally break it in half?
I don't know. So like I don't know how much you watch YouTube or like interested in what, like, following, but I was and am a big PewDiePie fan. He's the biggest YouTuber in the world, right? He's got 110 or whatever. I haven't watched him in a little while, but I subscribed to him when he was less than 100,000 subscribers.
Wow.
Right? So
okay. So you're an early adopter.
I'm an early adopter.
I subscribe with him to help him fight T-Series.
There you go. We appreciate your service. But I remember when he would, like, respond to comments and stuff and talk to people in chat and everything like that. And that's not something that, I mean, with 110 million, that's not something that he has the capacity to do anymore. Right. It's unreasonable to expect that he can have that sort of communication with most people. But, like, does that mean that he is bad or that he's worse? I don't know. It's different if I'm trying to get that actual, like, one-to-one relationship conversation. Like, he's probably not the guy anymore, right? I probably need to go find another content creator to try to have that. But it's an evolution. Is it worse? I don't know. I don't know. I guess I haven't thought about it enough.
I guess that does happen somewhat naturally. Even just what you just pointed out is that, okay, as people get bigger, then you feel less engaged by the community or less what's happening. It's like, okay, so now I need to go and look for you sort of stop playing that game because it's not as meaningful to you anymore. Like, it's like, that person can't have that role to me anymore. I guess that happens. That doesn't just happen on the internet. That happens just with people in general.
It's just everywhere. Even like a small church of 20 that blows up to 2,000, you're not going to have as much FaceTime with that pastor anymore. It's just not going to happen.
It's those intermediary moments, though, of, like, growing to a church of 2,000 that like, it has to kind of break apart and reform and break apart and reform. And there's always sort of, I don't know the word I'm looking for, in war where you kill people, but they weren't the ones you were trying to kill.
War crime? No. Casualties.
Casualties. There's always casualties of growing
growth pains.
Growing pains. That's an even tamer way of saying it.
Maybe less murdery way.
Well, I mean, but I wanted to use somewhat heavy language because that is a really.
I hear you.
It kind of sucks when that happens, and I was putting myself in that position for a second and thinking, what do you do? And I don't know if there totally is a solution to that. It's just, okay, when things grow, they change and stuff falls off, stuff falls apart, and I don't know, you got to try and roll with the punches a bit.
Yeah. My pastor puts it, I think, really well. He talks about how when it comes to change and growing and whatever within any community, that people don't fear change, they fear loss, right? Mm-hmm. They fear like they're going to lose something.
Right. And
you have to, as he puts it, as a leader, disappoint people at a rate that they can comprehend. Right. You have to make change. You have to continue to make change, but you have to do so at a pace.
Right. Where they can grieve the loss without being over
exactly
just tanked by it.
Exactly. Because otherwise they're going to lose. They're going to leave. They're going to, die off of the group.
Right.
But if you could do it steadily and gradually, then, and keep the why in front of everybody.
So here's the big question for me, and this is something I've been kind of, I'm kind of somewhat switching gears here, or maybe just jumping back a level in this conversation, because we're talking about how, how small groups are potentially the solution to the problem of growing congregations, growing communities, and less engagement from the top. Okay, so then we break it into smaller bits, and then people can still have a personal engagement. That's great. But are we on the same page that thinking that that's sort of more the heart of what it means to be practicing the religion of Christianity, like that? Like this is the thing that I was kind of frustrated with all throughout sort of Bible college as I started like learning about the church, and just started having the sudden self-awareness of, oh, we can actually think about what the church is doing and what the model is, and change it if we want to. And then
we could have some questions about this.
Right, exactly. It was suddenly just, oh, okay, I can think about this stuff. Yeah. And as the biggest thing that caught for me, and I don't know, I think this is some people, I'm not alone here in thinking that, okay, that seems to be more what Christianity is about. And everybody sort of does this. Everybody finds something that they're really excited about. Oh, this is what the church should really be about.
Right.
Where and I don't know. To some extent, I can't avoid that. This is just something that appeared to be meaningful to me, and I don't know how deep it goes. Like, do you think that that's actually more what the church ought to be doing? And if so, how can we sort of flip our emphasis? Because right now the emphasis is so much on the event and the and the conversion experience and the missionary, like these things that I've maybe too cynically been talking about, but this seems to be the emphasis of what evangelical, especially Assemblies of God type Christianity is aimed at.
For better or worse. Yeah. I think it's relatively obvious that that's an important thing for you, because you've made a habit now out of recording the style of the conversations that is really important to what you see as the church. Right. And I don't disagree with you personally. I think that these sorts of conversations that I have with a lot of close friends of mine, both saved and not, are like where I get the most meaningful, where I feel closest to having like a spiritual experience in a lot of ways. When I'm having these questions, I've asked heck of a lot of questions, and a lot of questions that I probably shouldn't have throughout my life. So I just 100% hear you there. As to how we,
well, here's a potential. Let me pitch you something, and I want to see if you can maybe talk back the technicalities of what would happen here. So like I had thought, okay, so the experience of doing like a concert type event, like a really well produced, like let's play some really great music and have some really talented people sing it, and then have a really talented artist speak, like a speech artist, a preacher, right?
Sure, yeah.
So we want to do all those things really, really well, but if that shouldn't be sort of the center of, if that's supposed to be sort of the mountaintop experience that gets us through the, not even that gets us through, but that sort of
the rest of the week.
that sets our sights so that we have something to kind of frame the rest of our lives around, then and we want to sort of continue to practice church, continue to practice the religion of Christianity. And when I'm talking about religion, some people are frustrated by that word. Some people just say, "Oh, okay, I want to be spiritual but not religious." I like the idea of religion. I think religion, to me, when I'm using the word religion, I'm just talking about structure. Talking about on this day we do this, and we do it with these approximate rules, this approximate form, right? So as far as how to continue to have a function of Christianity in community, if we want to sort of reverse the emphasis or flip the emphasis and focus more on community integration and living as Christians, what if we did a concert once every month or once every 2 months and focused a lot of our energy and resources and attention on the small group model?
I have a very close friend of mine, Diamond DeAmpert. I grew up with her. She is starting a church in downtown Detroit, and they're only having services once every 3 weeks, and the rest of it is small groups, more or less. They have a couple different kinds of. I want to
talk to her.
You should talk to her. She would be an incredible person to have on here. Very like thought leader, absolutely hugely influential in my life and many others. But I absolutely believe that I think in a lot of ways. So the way that I've thought about it before, I don't think I've ever actually said this. I definitely have said it not on any Blackbar stuff, but when I think about the mountaintop experience, the Sunday morning thing, are you familiar with the phrase "chasing the dragon"?
No, but that sounds exciting to me. Explain.
So yeah, well, probably shouldn't be super exciting, but it's the idea that I believe with meth users, the idea is that you try meth for the first time, and it's this.
I didn't know this is where we were going.
Right? Yeah, this mind-blowing experience or whatever. It's this huge deal,
right?
And you want like do it again, so you try it again, and it's not quite as great. It's not as awesome as the first time you experience. So you have to take a little bit more. Right. And you have to take a little bit more. And in order to continue having that experience, you have to take a little bit more. And there comes a point where the dealer doesn't have any more, and you have to find somebody else to give you a little bit more. Right. And I heard about that phrase, and I couldn't help but to make this correlation with what you've been describing as the mountaintop experience, the Sunday morning experience of this chasing the dragon of this emotional, spiritual moment that happens every Sunday. And if it doesn't quite hit for me on one Sunday, then that's going to affect the rest of my week, right? If it doesn't hit for me for a whole 6 months, maybe my dealer doesn't have any good stuff, and I got to go find somebody else right now. And where that actual idol, that mountaintop experience has become an idol in and of itself, right? And I don't disagree with you at all. I personally, and probably my own stuff I got to work out, there's a few times where I feel less connected to God these days than in a typical Sunday morning service. That's not how I do it. That's not for me. Again, like we were talking before, I don't think it'll entirely go away. It'll always be there to an extent. How do we flip it? How do we flip the switch? I think we stop looking to the church for like the churches.
Can we parse out a difference between like church. The church as people being Christians and the church as an institution, like as a business, like, and I'm not trying to, I don't, both of those have negative connotations. But churches are businesses, and they have to sort of keep running on this level. Right. And then there's also people going to the church, which is also within a theological framework, the church.
Yeah. I think that we stop looking at maybe we'll say capital C churches, institutions as our sole and primary way of interacting with our faith and our God, right? And I think if we do find ways to make it more relational, if we do find ways to really, and maybe this is the key, maybe this is the thing that people haven't figured out yet, to find other Christians and interact with them independently, to create those small groups environment or whatever. And, the institution of churches are pretty handy for finding other Christians, right? So maybe it's a bit of give and take there, but not looking at maybe the Sunday morning experience and that whole thing being the primary way.
I didn't even realize the statistic was the case, but I watched the video that even kind of sparked this whole idea to go and chat with you again about this concept specifically again, which was I think it's maybe still your most recent video that's out. May not be when this conversation comes out.
Sure.
But sure. I forget what the title is of it. But in the video, you said that the average person who goes to church, average Protestant Christian in America in 2017 only went to church once every 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks. Once every 4 to 6 weeks, they're in the building. If that's the way Christians, I mean, if we've sort of done the experiment, we see, okay, this is about how meaningful this experience is to me. This is how much I want to do it. Right. Why are we not just like tapping into, okay, that's the new model. We do it every 4 to 6 weeks. And then the rest of it, we have all these resources and all these people that are devoted to this, to doing this. Even we have a business to empower people to sit there and just spend their time thinking about how to better engage Christians and better engage the church people. Sure. Why not take all that resources and do it?
Absolutely. I think maybe a terrifying, albeit a bit cynical way to look at this, right? So churches, when we're marketing stuff, again, as a slimy lizard marketing, we're marketing products just like anybody else, any business, right? A lot of business will exchange products and services for money. Mm-hmm. We exchange services, literally, for time. right?
Right.
You pay a certain amount of time, maybe money, depending on how connected you are in the church or whatever.
Yeah.
You pay a certain amount of time to actually show up, right?
Yeah.
And by that statistic that we're looking at, only 20 to 15% of the time Christians believe that attending a church on Sunday morning is worth the time to show up. Right. That there are so many other things that they could be spending that time on that they consciously or unconsciously deem as more valuable.
And I think it's like most of the experience of going to church at this point, especially in the Assemblies of God. I mean, I can speak to this mostly because that was most of my Christian experience going to church was Assemblies of God. Most of that experience is something that can be bottled up and packaged as content and streamed online.
Sure.
And it's like, okay, so I'm not really missing much if I just do it online.
Exactly. Yeah, and
it's a lot of trouble to go to church.
Yeah, it totally is. Absolutely. I don't even have any kids, and it's still a pain in the butt to get ready.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that stat is from 2017.
Yeah.
There's no way that got any better when everybody had to sit home for a year. Yeah. No way that got any better.
Yeah.
So the way that I look at this, and this, going back to the techno positive person I am, if they're not showing up to the building, for 3 to 5 weeks at a time, then we have to find a different way to connect with them. Because although I would agree with you that maybe we should be viewing the mountaintop experience, the Sunday morning experience, as maybe a more occasional thing, I don't think that we should just say that that's good enough, right? That we should not be interacting with people. We should, as individual Christians, that church is now just something I do once a month. Like, I don't think that fixes the problem.
Right.
I think we need to find a different way to engage with. And I think maybe it's a small group model. I don't know. The other problem is, I can tell you this as a marketing person who have tried, it's really hard to get people in small groups. It's the hardest thing I have to market every single year is small groups. Though the return rate is incredibly low.
I mean, the Discord thing might. I'm interested to see the experiments with that model for
right.
And it's interesting. Okay, now I'm going to be optimistic for a second, because as far as as far as social media and social social platforms, I guess that's the right category I'm looking for. As far as social platforms go, Discord seems to be the most concerned with actually a community engaging with itself.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't see Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, any of them being even remotely as concerned about that as Discord is. And so many things about Discord have addressed some of the key issues that I have with like, so I mean, what are the problems with, like, you look at a lot of different YouTube video chat streams, and it's like, it's just a blazing fest of emojis and swear words and just a bunch of people really angry at each other or really mad at each other for being mad at the content creator. It's disgusting. Right. It's nowhere. It just looks like a mob.
It's not community.
Right.
Exactly.
And so Discord, for one thing, they limit it down to, okay, so there's individual Discord communities you can join, and then from there there's individual chat rooms, and then from there, depending on how sort of popular the chat room is, how many people are trying to talk there, you engage slow mode, and then people, okay, well, now I only have this long of a turn, and my turn can be whenever I want it to be, but I don't get to post again for another 10 minutes. So I better make this count, and I better be thoughtful, and I better listen to somebody else, and I better give people reason to want to listen to what I have to say and not just be, flame warring.
Yeah, I sincerely believe that if Discord wasn't called Discord, 10 times as many churches would use it, because it does seem like purpose built for fellowship, just like 24/7. You don't need to have even a time to meet with a small group anymore. You could just be connected all the time, interacting in whatever way. And I think it's an excellent way for a church body or any community to be just grow together. That's it. Literally,
we should
think they're doing
just lift the Discord model, and we'll just make a new app, call it Harmony. I would bet anything that in like 2 to 3 years it's not called Discord anymore. Yeah, I was going to say that they're probably going to rebrand, because I noticed even over the pandemic they started sort of marketing to schools and school communities, which I think again is great. I think there's a lot of deep problems with the way that we do school as well that I think that Discord is doing a lot better than.
Absolutely. I think it's funny because it was originally built as just like a dumb like way for video gamers to just talk to each other while we're playing World of Warcraft or whatever. Yeah. But it has grown, and like the community that we built on Blackbar.
Because I wouldn't have expected gamers to be the ones that understood community better than I don't know.
Well, I think gamers were probably the first community to want and actively seek purely digital online relationships as actively as they needed to, right?
That's interesting.
Like I mean, I know even for myself, there were plenty of people that I knew growing up that I only knew their username, right? That I only talked to them, interacted with them when I needed a raid partner or raid buddies or something like that, right? So I think that they needed to solve the problem before anybody else did. And now all of a sudden everybody's realizing that, hey, this is a pretty good fix. It's just a stupid name that is going to be a pain in my side until they fix it. When it comes to churches, at least. I think it's fine, but I get why.
I think it sounds cool. And that's probably why it's called Discord. It's because it sounds cool.
Right. For games, for gamers, it's perfect. Right up the alley. But they'll probably need to change it at some point.
Okay, I mean, I feel like we could sit here and flesh out some more details for quite a bit longer, but
sure,
I don't want to take up too much of your life. I do actually want to return to this and keep chatting, but I think this is probably as good a place as any to kind of slow things down. But dude, thank you so much for taking a couple hours out of your day to talk with me about this stuff. I'm interested to see where your church community goes. I'm interested to see where my life takes me, how I figure out ending up being able to sort of re-engage faith. But this has been good to talk about, man.
Yeah, this is my favorite thing to talk about. So anytime you would like to talk about it, I am happy to. I live for these conversations. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. Hopefully this sparks some conversation with the people that listen to this and they have some thoughts, and hopefully we can get some cool ideas going.
I think some of the ideas we talked about were cool.
Well, yeah, more ideas, more thoughts. We need more monsters on the edge of the field, right?
Subscribe, be a monster today.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, that was interesting. If you enjoyed this conversation, feel free to share it with a friend. Or, even better, take whatever you found interesting here and go and have a real face-to-face conversation with somebody that you care about, or somebody that you don't understand very well. I think face-to-face conversation is one of the most important tools that we have for building and maintaining real relationships and real communities. Many institutions in our lives have an incentive to crowd out these longer, more engaging interactions with short-form junk food content. I get it. They're just trying to make money. The point of this project for me is to spend some time pushing back against some of those forces in my life. I want to practice listening to and engaging with people that I don't necessarily understand very well. I also want to spend some time listening to and learning from some people who seem to have a good track record of listening to and engaging with people that they disagree with. If you're interested in working on some of this stuff too, feel free to keep up with this project by subscribing and pressing the little bell thingy that lets YouTube know that you want to keep seeing these videos. I really think that if we can get better at conversation, we might actually change the world. Anyway, thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.